Aloha. I'm so happy you've come to listen to our podcast today. I'm here with Scott Huffaker from Pensacola, Florida, and he has a marvelous story about dealing with the life and death of his son. So, welcome, Scott. Very happy to
Thank
have
you.
you here.
Thank you for having me here.
Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I was raised in North Alabama and moved to South Alabama and the Gulf Coast when I was about 19 years old, and been here ever since. And got married when I was 19, and uh, had a tumultuous relationship, I guess, really throughout the entire time. But we ended up having three children, and then and I also basically raised my oldest stepdaughter. Well, she was only 6 at the time when my wife at the time, she and I married, um, and then later on down the road, I got a divorce, and then remarried and had two other children. And so currently, uh, two, currently two children still at home and three dogs, and that's quite a lot.
Yeah, that is. It's amazing anymore when you ask somebody how many children they have. I always tell people it depends on how you count.
Right, exactly.
So then your son, and I'm sorry, I forgot his name, is
Dylan.
Dylan. Dylan was born with, I think, relatively rare heart situation. Can you tell us about that?
Sure. He actually, um, unbeknownst to us, usually even 30 years ago, they had, decent technology to be able to forecast, if a child had, defects or something, but we didn't even know. And when he was born, he had what's called tricuspid atresia, which is basically three chambers versus four in the heart. He had pulmonary stenosis, which was partial blockage of the artery that goes from the heart to the lung. His heart was upside down and on the wrong side, and he had a hole in the top of his heart as well. So, um, and what was interesting, I always like sharing this because it's to me it's one of the most fascinating parts of his story, is that when he was born, Dr. Kirkland, who was at UAB, because we had to take him up there shortly. He was born in Mobile, and then we had to take him to Birmingham shortly thereafter. And so Dr. Kirkland at the time, who the Kirkland Clinic at UAB is named after, he told us at the time, he's not a candidate for a heart transplant. And so, they said that the best they could do is what they called a Fontan procedure. They couldn't do that till he was 3 years old, and they would go in and they would take his heart out and try to rework it as best as they could, and that they felt like that would give him some time to live. Well, by the time he was about 21, he was on his last leg, and but what was interesting is that at that time he was 21 years later, he was a candidate for a heart transplant. But what was even more interesting was that it was Dr. Kirkland's son that did the transplant.
Wow. That is so amazing. You just don't hear of children having that severe of an issue with their heart being able to survive. Even
Yeah.
when you said 3 years old, I thought, well, I'm not sure he's going to make it to 3, but look
Right.
at how long he lived. It's pretty amazing.
Right. Well, and he I forgot what I was going to say. I was just going to say that I can't remember now. I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought there.
It's okay. We've got good editors and they'll fix it. So with when he was born and you discovered that there were those problems, how did you and your wife handle it? What did you go through?
Well, I mean, for the most part, I will give her a ton of credit. No matter how things ended between us, I don't think Dylan would have lived as long um, if it hadn't been for his mom. She was tenacious. She was driven. She was determined that he was going to live.
Wow. That's so wonderful. And a lot of times, I think most of the time, anybody with a health issue, uh, whether it's a baby born with a problem like Dylan did, or whether it's someone who develops a heart problem later on in life, they need an advocate. There's only so much you can do. Obviously, an infant can't do anything on their own, but you really need someone to speak for you or for them, whoever it is, to be able to get things accomplished.
Yep. And that was her. He couldn't have had a better advocate.
That's so wonderful.
Yeah. So anyway, she was definitely the driving force behind him. But I mean, for the most part, I would say, I guess, to maybe further answer that, I mean, it probably brought us all closer. More than, a lot of times when you have traumatic situations in lives like that, sometimes it tears couples apart.
Mhm.
But I think probably for all of us, it brought us all together.
That's really wonderful. And you're right. I've seen that so much when a child dies, the parents handle it differently
Yep.
from one another. And when they do that, they sometimes people start accusing the other side, and it gets hurtful and messy, and it's not helpful at all. I used to see that in the hospital all the time when I was dealing with
Yeah.
kids, and there was a lot of blame involved, and there's nobody to blame in a situation like this.
No, for sure. There was nobody, and even if you could, I mean, it would have been supposition. And, at the end of the day, it's kind of like dealing with grief. A lot of those things, there's no sense even entertaining because it's not going to get you anywhere.
Mm-hmm. That's right. The important thing, I think, is to focus on the moment. What does everybody
Yep.
need at this point right now? It doesn't matter what happened yesterday,
Right.
but what do we need to do to make this moment good and be able to go on to the next moment, whatever that
Yep.
is.
Absolutely. Total agreement.
So how was Dylan between when he was born and when he had that surgery at 3? Was he like a normal little baby, or was he struggling, or?
Yeah. I mean, for the most part, he did pretty good. I mean, really, throughout his entire life, he did pretty good. And I mean, he had his moments. I mean, he couldn't get out and run and play like a lot of kids. He was limited on his physical abilities to a certain extent. I mean, he could run around and walk and stuff like that, but I mean, running and biking and those kind of things he couldn't really do. But as far as just sitting around the house doing homework, or playing video games, or just normal things that kids do today, he was totally capable of doing that. Good good kid.
Yeah, I know this is hard. You love somebody that much and you start reflecting, it's hard. And it's obvious you loved him very, very much. And you were very fortunate to have him in your life. So how do you look at him as, how does he affect your life altogether now that he's gone?
Well, I think, and that's one of the reasons why I wrote the book. I think, for me, healing's a lot of things. I have to make his life meaningful. And one of the things that I can do is honor him. Um, Doing things that we would do together, but also, as I wrote the book, I did it to honor him because he has a story.
That's right. Can tell us a little bit about the book. The name I found real interesting, and tell us why you chose to write it in the manner that you did.
Well, I think you probably read in the beginning, you know, I was watching a episode. It was the second episode of this current season of NCIS, and it was I think it was the 27th of September that it aired. And I was sitting there with my wife, and we were watching NCIS. I don't watch a lot of TV, but that show's pretty good. So, and she likes it, so we watched it. And so, if you're familiar with the characters, Mark Harmon, who plays Jethro Gibbs, he has a friend named Tobias, who's an FBI agent, and so they were on a stakeout of a serial killer, and so he had Gibbs had not seen Tobias, his friend Tobias, or Joe Spano is the other actor's name. He had not seen him in quite a while, and so he gets in the truck. Tobias did, and he says, "Hey, how are you doing? I hadn't seen you in a while." He says, "Well, I'm doing pretty good." He says, "Are you still doing that group thing with Palmer, who's the coroner?" And he said, "Yeah." He said that counseling's really helped me very well. He said, "You should try it." And they talk a little bit more, and then he starts. I mean, Mark Harmon's in his 70s now, and so on the show, he says, you need to. I don't know why you work so much. It's just because you're, always trying to fill this void. And he said, "What void?" He says, Gibbs, he says, "You and I are both alike." He says, "We're like twins." He says, "We both lost jobs. We both lost wives, more than one. And, now I've joined your club." He said, "I've lost a child." He said, "That's not a club." He says, "Well, it's certainly not one I would join." He said, "What would you even call it?" And when he said that, I never thought about it. I never thought about that there's not a name. I mean, you got a name for widows, people that lose their spouse, widows and widowers, and you got, a name for, children that lose their parents are called orphans, but there's no name. I mean, the closest thing is an old Sanskrit word called Viloma, which means against the natural order, which that's what it is. You know, uh, children, parents were never, supposed to lose their children, but it happens. And so when that was in September, and Dylan passed away on the 6th of August, I said, I got to change this. And it was at that point that I realized that I needed to tell a story for a lot of reasons, because I wanted to honor him. But, I felt like there was, other people needed help. And one of the things I want to do is I want enough people for us to gather together to come up with a word, because I do think it's important, not from the standpoint, and don't get me wrong, and I don't want this to sound insensitive. Um, Not that I feel like that we're victims, because I don't believe in a victim mindset. Uh, you know, from as far as embracing it for a long period of time. There are times when we are victims. I'm not saying that, but I just feel like it's something that needs to be identified, because, again, if I may just, I didn't actually mention this in the book, but if I can reflect on history, um, you look at, um, if you look in Egypt when the Israelites were there, and they were trying to get the Israelites free. Moses was trying to get the Israelites freed. There was 10 plagues that came and fell upon the Egyptians. And every time Pharaoh said, "No, I'm not releasing them," until the last time. And if you recall, that 10th plague was the death of the firstborn. It was the one that finally broke him. And then if you look at Job, Job was looked at as a righteous man, and God had a conversation with Satan, and he said, "Hey, go after my man Job. You can't break him." And look at the first thing that he did. He took his children. And so, to me, in those historical moments, I think that defines that that's one of the greatest emotional traumas that can happen to a person.
It really is. And it's fascinating about not having a word for that, a name or a label, so to speak. Because they say so much. And if like, I don't usually say I'm a widow. even though I have been widowed twice. I'll say something like my husband died, because there's something about the label to me that isn't particularly positive. To me, it projects sorrow and
Yeah.
pain.
Hmm.
And absolutely, I was sad and had pain when they died. There's no question
Sure.
about that. But I'm choosing to live my life helping others to feel better about what's happening with them when they're dealing with their loss and their grief. So
Right.
the labels are important. I know when my mom died, my dad died before she did. And after mom died, one of my friends said, "Well, you're an orphan now." And I thought, you didn't need to say that to me. It really hit me
Yeah.
hard, because you think of orphans as children, and it kind of
Right.
really took me back. But I do think it's important to be able to be truthful in your description. People will understand more if they realize where you're coming from.
Right.
Um, so I think that that's important too. So, and I love that, the idea of the story you told about NCIS, that I think somehow we seek out people that are in our club,
Hmm.
whatever it is, and that we can help support each other, however
Yep.
that goes.
Well,
So,
we're all looking for somebody to connect with that we has commonality for sure,
yeah.
no matter what it is.
Hmm. Um, can you tell me a favorite memory you had with Dylan?
last last February, not this year, last year, we, um, my middle son Tyler came from California, as I mentioned to you. He lived on Catalina Island, but he came over, and he and I and Dylan all went together to Birmingham for him to see the doctor. I enjoyed that.
That's cool to get to be with both boys. It's really special. I can obviously tell this is raw for you and recent. So,
And that's okay. I mean, I'm not like this all the time, because it's just sometimes when I talk about it.
oh, sure. And I understand that too. But I do that
Yeah.
still. It's been a lot longer for me since my last husband died, but it doesn't mean it. I cried this morning about it, because a friend of mine is starting her own podcast, and she had me listen to her first one that she's recorded to get my opinion, to see whether I thought she needed to change anything or if she was on the right track. And it turned out to be about my husband,
Yeah.
and about
Right.
her relationship with him. It was a beautiful relationship. I still have a beautiful relationship with her, and it was all positive. There was nothing negative in it, but still,
Yeah.
just hearing her talk about it brought tears. So it's perfectly normal. And what's bad is when you
Absolutely.
don't let them out.
Yeah.
That can cause lots of problems if you don't do that.
Well, and
Now,
I think that's why there's so many people like yourself that are in grief counseling, is because we don't let grief be what it needs to be.
mhm, that's right.
And
That's
that's comprehensive.
that really is. It's one of the reasons that I suggest a few things. One of them is writing about it, to write whatever happened, whatever you want to write about it. And for you, I would suggest, when you're ready, you don't have to do it right this instant, but when you're ready, I think it would be great, sorry, for you to write a letter to Dylan and tell him
Mhm.
anything you wish you could have said that you didn't get to, anything that you want to tell him, how you felt about him, anything like that. Write it all out, and just really
Yeah.
lay it out there. And when you get done, sign it like you would at the bottom of a letter, and then start a second letter and have that letter be from Dylan to you. And you'll be amazed at what happens when you write that second letter. Don't anticipate what he'd say or what was going on or anything. Just let it flow and see what happens. I've
Yeah.
had people find a lot of comfort from that exercise, that it really helps them a
Sure.
lot.
I'm sure, because I mean, as you probably, I kind of grazed over in the book. I mean, I certainly believe that we can even still communicate
Mhm.
through today. I mean, again, my intent of the book, and I didn't really try to make it, faith based or biblical, but I mean, in Hebrews, it talks about the cloud of witnesses, and those, and and if they're witnesses, then they're seeing, they're hearing what's going on.
Mhm. Yep, that's right. Well, your book is, I read it and I was quite fascinated by it. I hadn't read anything like that before. And I know that you wrote it kind of in honor of your son. And I was really touched that all the proceeds from it are going to help somebody else. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, I mean, we were fortunate. I mean, we had to go to Birmingham multitude of times, and we were very fortunate that we had, through church connections and stuff like that, places. At a couple of times, we did stay on UAB's housing facilities, but most of the time, usually it was, people that from church, the local church up there, that provided us a place to stay. But so when Dylan passed away, I called Connie, his nurse, and I said, "Is there?" I wanted to do something to honor him, and so I said, "Is there anything that you can think of that, that's local, that could be helpful and that we could do to honor Dylan?" And so she told me about Red Mountain Grace, and what they do is they provide rooms for people that come to Birmingham for whatever reason, but they're there for an extended medical stay,
Mhm.
and so they provide them a room for $10 a night.
Wow.
And yeah, yeah. So, that they're, strictly a nonprofit and a fund based organization. So, initially, whenever, he passed away, I just asked that everybody, instead, in lieu of flowers or gifts or whatever, give to that. And I mean, all kinds of people did. We raised over $7,000 just in that short period of time. So I'm hoping we can do a whole lot more.
Oh, I'm sure you will. You're it's such a wonderful idea, and how you're handling it. That's one of the really tough things when, especially when you have a child that's ill and you want to be there with them. I know I live in Maui, and most of the medical care in Hawaii is on a different island. And we don't have boats that go back and forth between them. You actually have to fly over.
Right.
And the flights are expensive. It's amazing how the inter-island flights would be that much. It's not like being able to take a bus or a train or something it's in the same state. And somebody that I knew had a daughter with a brain tumor, very young daughter, and she started a GoFundMe program just to help them with expenses, because for years now, I'm trying to remember how old she is now. I think maybe 6. And she got it very, very young. And they've had so many times where they've had to go to someplace else and stay. And we're not that far away. It doesn't take that long to get there, but it's just too expensive to
Right.
go back and forth. And they want to be there where she is. And I know every time she sends out little newsletters about how her daughter's doing now. And I'm amazed at how well her daughter is doing, because she had the kind of brain cancer that isn't likely to give you a long life. And she's a beautiful child. And every
Mm.
time I give a little bit every time I get a letter from them, and it builds up, and she's got lots of friends and supporters. And whenever they get those
Yeah.
emails about her, the donations come in. You can follow and see how much is coming in. And I just think that's such a wonderful thing to do, So I love what you chose to do. I think that's really great. And I will have
Thank you.
in the show notes the link to get the book and be able to support this cause too. I think would be really wonderful. So thank you, Scott, for being on the show today. This has been really powerful, and I think it's going to be helpful to other people that need to deal or have to deal with things like you've dealt with.
I hope so, and that's my goal too. I mean, at the end of the day, uh, so many people helped us through the years, um, and Dylan was such a blessing.
Yeah, he sounds like just a
And I
wonderful
want to bless.
guy.
I want to bless other people.
It's beautiful. It's really beautiful. Well, thank you all for listening today. I'm so glad you got to hear this story. It really touched my heart, and I'm sure it does yours too, and gives you a lot to think about with the value of your everyday life. Every moment's precious. So I hope to see you next week, and thanks again, Scott.
Thank you, Miss Emily. Have a great day.